nanin, nanin, day, hey, nanin, 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 day, hey, hey, yo, hey, yo, hey, yo.
Depending on whose figures you use, there are at least 45 million hunters and fishers in the United States. They are among the most prominent and influential of all demographic groups. They support more jobs than the largest Fortune 500 company. Each year, they generate 6 times more gold and silver than Hollywood's top 40 movies of all time. License sales and federal excise taxes on rods and reels and firearms and ammunition pay most of the bill for fisheries and wildlife conservation. For example, duck stamp purchases since 1934 have paid for over 5 million acres of wildlife habitat, greater in size than the state of Massachusetts. Volunteer hunters make up groups like Ducks Unlimited, which by itself has conserved over 11 million acres of wetland habitat in North America to the benefit of the entire living community. In less than 20 years, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation has conserved millions of acres for elk and other wildlife. It has successfully reestablished elk in the Midwest and northeastern United States. There are more deer and wild turkeys now than at any time in history. The remarkable list of achievements of North American hunters and anglers goes on. Clearly, hunting is justifiable economically and environmentally. But tragically, at the very time when the earth needs them most, the recruitment of youth into hunting is dwindling. The decline is due in part to a lack of understanding of the social and moral justifications for hunting. That hunting may elevate human character is indicated by the honor roll of hunters. It includes exemplary leaders, conservationists, writers, and artists such as Thomas Jefferson, Audubon, Thoreau, Robert Louis Stevenson, Teddy Roosevelt, Aldo Leopold, John Steinbeck, Gary Cooper, Jimmy Stewart, and others. 2 of the greatest peacemakers of all time are avid hunters, Jimmy Carter and Nelson Mandela. So how does hunting influence human development? Is it good or bad for kids? How do they feel about taking the life of an animal? Does hunting encourage violence towards people? These are some of the questions asked of kids who hunt and leading authorities in several fields. The experts agree that hunting helps our youth develop into compassionate, virtuous, and responsible adults who respect life and protect nature.
Well, hunting is important to me because it gives me a chance to get out in the world that I love, which is nature, and I get to be with the animals, which are pretty much my best friends. I like to watch the animals and learn from them and be a hunter, and that's all part of what I like to do.
I hunt because I've done it my whole life, and my dad's done it and my brothers have, and I guess it's just a part of me. And
it's fun, and you get to learn about them, and they look cool to me, and learn about their habitat, what they live in, and learn about what they eat, and eat their meat.
Well, you feel real bad at first. I'm sure everybody does, but knowing that you're going to use the animal, and most people use a lot more than others, but just knowing that it's not going to go to waste, and you use that animal, and you just feel good about yourself in a way. But you have a lot of respect for the animal for giving its life to you.
Whenever my dad shoots something, I think about something dying, like me dying or something, because it was a living thing.
And I've prayed for having animals come to where you would be able to shoot them and have them give their life to you, that you may be able to provide for your family. And then I always thank God for providing me with that animal that I would be able to shoot, and that He would be willing to give His life for me, basically.
Do that just about every time. It helps me feel better about it, and it helps me know that God knows that I didn't just shoot it to shoot it. Whenever I could, I'd take it. And it's going to help my family in the future. I can see how they would think that from the outside. I understand totally. But having experiences with those kind of things, you grow and it becomes part of you. And you become a true hunter when you know the respect for the animal that you take and the price you both pay.
I think a lot of people don't understand that hunting's a fact of life, and it's not only people who hunt. You can go out in the wild and you'll see that like bears, cougars, and all those things also hunt, and we need the food just as bad as they do. You have to be very respectful and responsible for the guns and to be shooting. You don't want to shoot at the wrong thing or something, so you have to be very respectful and responsible. And if nobody who's that respectful and responsible would go into a school and start shooting other kids.
I don't feel that just because you go out and shoot an animal that you're going to go into school and shoot somebody that you have a grudge against over one little thing. Because I don't know why, it's just, to me, it doesn't seem logical. Because it seems like two separate worlds. Because I've been taught to respect both sides of the story. And to respect the guns, to respect the animals, and to respect other people.
There's more to it than just pulling the trigger.
I'm going to teach my kids how to hunt and how to fish and all that kind of stuff so that they know and understand the true meaning behind it, and so that they're not misled by all the different reports that are done on hunting, and they know that just because you hunt doesn't make you a bad person. And someday it may be their only way of survival, and they need to have that knowledge behind them so that they know how to survive in a difficult situation.
But it's such a big part of my life, or at least I try to make it that it means that much to me.
A lot of these, probably the majority of these kids sitting here went through hunter safety course, and they are educated on what a gun can do, and that it can be dangerous, but if you respect it and use it properly, that kids who are taught those things have a greater respect for what a gun is capable of, and those generally aren't the people that are on doing these violent acts that we're being lumped in with. So I think it's important that they realize that kids are educated not only by their families and the aunts and uncles or grandmas or whoever's taking them out to do this, but they also have community projects where they have hunter safety courses where these kids are showed what they are in possession of when they have a gun in their hand. And I think it's really important that people know that.
If the kids that are around hunting and they've seen what a gun can actually do to an animal, so I think that makes them think a little bit more of what it might do to a person, and then they got a visual of what a gun can actually do to somebody or something.
If the kids weren't out hunting and learned responsible activities with the hunting or outdoorsmanship or what have you, what else would they be doing other than looking for something to do? If they're given something productive to do, they're less likely to be getting into trouble. So it's not all a bad thing to be teaching them the outdoors and, you know, how to handle a gun safely and how to go out and be with the family. I work 6 days a week. Sunday is our only day to go out and be together, and that's mainly when we get to spend our time is in the outdoors.
The Vision and Wilderness Awareness School brings people on a journey through their senses, through their hearts. One of the things that we express there is that as you utilize your senses for more than reading or writing, as you utilize your senses for more than just reading the stop sign or walking into your door and doing the things that become rote and rut for us in our modern life, you develop a patterning experience. I know that this gear, this brain, these eyes, these ears, this nose, this body was designed for its 3 million year history, which is interaction and connection with nature. It's not really designed for what modern people try to apply it for, and in so doing they get off course. They don't follow their instructions, so to speak. So the DNA is saying one thing, and The lifestyle of today is saying something else, and there's a confusion that emerges from that. People don't know who they are. So it's simply, let's get people back to what our senses were designed for. Let's get them out of the idea that this is about philosophy or religion or ideology. It's not. It's simply about neuromuscular patterning in the natural world. They become better people. So it has wide transference. I mean, tracking has incredible transference, you know. Pattern recognition, learning to see beyond the surface, asking deeper questions, not taking things on face value. These are all things that make us thrive in any setting, whether it's the wilderness or in the modern world. But maybe the most important thing is they get to know themselves. They begin to hear their own voice. They start to realize that even their thoughts send concentric rings or ripples through their own being, and that they create mischief in their body just the same way that their thoughts create mischief in the forest. You know, the way their being creates mischief in the forest. But boy, everything we do dovetails perfectly with hunting. And everybody who's on the path of these programs eventually comes to that place where they feel the need to hunt. And they hunt in a sacred manner. They need to approach it in that way. They can't, it's not about the firearm experience or the bow experience. To them, it's about the harvesting in a sacred way, because that is emphasized again and again and again in our programs.
The idea of hunting, going out into the wilderness, with the skills of bow and arrow or of rifle, to take game in a sacred way, it's impossible to do that without bringing in generosity and fortitude and patience and humility. When that sacred element is involved, then hunting, I think, may be one of the greatest and most powerful ways to learn the virtues, especially for a young person. If a young person who is learning to shoot the bow and arrow and to go out and track game, if he's made aware by his mentor or his friend or his colleague about what are they going to do with the game? Are they going to share it, for example? If they're going to share the game, then the generosity becomes a part of the hunt. If they talk about our experience, the waiting and the patience that is necessary to really get a good shot at the game and do it safely, that patience becomes truly understood in a deep way. The fortitude, especially when the hunt uses physicalness and not just a four-wheel drive Jeep that you shoot from the front seat, but when hunting involves getting out into the wilderness and suffering the difficulty of endurance, I believe that the fortitude becomes a real important virtue that can be a part of that young person's life forever. The humility, when someone kills an animal, whether it be a rabbit or a deer, and one does it in a sacred way, and one really truly understands that you are taking a life, instead of feeling really arrogant and powerful, I think that one would wind up feeling humility if it was done in that way. So, you know, the generosity, the fortitude, the patience, the humility, and of course the courage. It takes courage many times to be in the wilderness, to face big game, but also it takes a kind of courage to kill in a way that's sacred, because when you are realizing how connected you are to the animal and that you and the animal are one, it's not like killing an enemy. It's not like killing something that you think is worthless or that is only there for you to eat or to kill, and is not there for the reasons that you are here to live this life in a good way. And when you take that animal with that in mind, it takes a lot of courage to do that. So I think, in short, to truly have a population that in this country practices the virtues, to teach them in school is good if we can teach it in the way of weaving it into all curriculum. But if young people could have fathers or mothers or uncles or grandfathers who could take them into the wild and teach them the respectful way to hunt, teach them with that spiritual sacredness that really is represented in the Lakota word matakoyeoyasin, which means we are all related. And if one goes out into that wilderness with that sense of relatedness, then I think it would be almost impossible for them to emerge from the experience without having learned one of those universal virtues, if not all of them. Right, Brio?
There is no substitute in modern life for the taking of an animal life, and there's no substitute for the taking of an enemy life. So hunting and war provide those two things, and ironically, people often don't get this, but paradoxically, war makes males more empathic, and hunting makes males more empathic because of the very thing you're talking about. Because we take a life, we value life, and we understand how to value it, and we feel an intense need to care for life. And hunting, of course, is the original way that happened, and then around 10,000 years ago, population rose and all these wars arose, so war became, we became agriculture. We didn't hunt as much, but we made war. And war also created that empathy. And now, you're right. I mean, for that, I can't give the substitute. For that, we're probably, over the next 10, 20 years, because of wise thinking, like you're thinking, we should watch that. We should see, are our young males able to develop empathy in the ways we need them to? Anything that challenges the human being's search for meaning is engendering self-esteem. Anything that requires the young human being to face life and death and to endure is developing self-esteem. And then there's the basic skills. You know, he learns a skill, he utilizes a skill. And then there's the admiration from his culture. You did this really great, we admire you. So all of those things are building self-esteem. And also at the soulful level of meaning, of facing life and death and facing the search for meaning, and constantly having to ask why. Because when someone hunts, one is always unconsciously saying, why am I doing this? And having to always justify this activity, which is not only so basically natural, but also so basically different than just about everyone else, you know, in the society. So there's all of that going on. And I think for people, if people want to get a comparison, people can compare, have a kid, watch a kid playing a video game in which it appears he's hunting. Video games are using male neurology, right? They're using basic male evolutionary biology, and they're creating hunting scenarios, hunting and war scenarios. Most of the video games are hunting and war scenarios. So it's very smart of these people who develop them. They get the male brain, you know. But at the same time, watch a kid who plays a video game for 2 hours that's, let's say, Myst or Doom or Apocalypse or whatever it is, you know. Watch them playing that, and then go take them hunting, or just watch them hunt for 2 hours. You know, the serenity in the hunting experience, the self-esteem gain, and all of those things, as compared to just, okay, basic entertainment and neural stimulation of the video game, they're really different. So people can see it themselves. If they want to answer this question, watch the boys who hunt and watch the boys who play video games, and they'll be really impressed with the self-esteem level of the boys who hunt. Hunting requires one to develop those basic moral competencies, that responsibility is one of those. Responsibility, fairness, sense of justice. You know, all hunting requires one to constantly be thinking, why am I doing it? How does this fit? What is giving up its life for me? And so therefore, what responsibility do I have to use this correctly, to use this practice in service? All of those things are coming up. And again, when you and I are talking about hunting, I hope everyone knows we're talking about responsible hunting already. You know, 2 single moms had read The Wonder of Boys. And in The Wonder of Boys, I talk about how hunting can be useful, or I make some reference to the rite of passage experience, and the line I have in there actually is that they were responding to is, when your son, for single moms, when your son gets to be as tall as you are, it's time to find a man to help you make this boy into a man. And I had this idea, Uncle Hans in South Africa, okay? And this is a true story. What they did is they saved their money, and they planned this all out because their sons had turned 13 and they were both getting pretty tall. And they planned out that by 14 they were going to send both these boys to Uncle Hans, who lives in South Africa, and they live in Spokane, Washington. And this is a big investment for them, but they really believe, these 2 single moms really believe these sons need initiation and rite of passage. So a year later, that were all worked out, and they called me and told me about it, and I helped them facilitate a little. They sent the boys spent 6 weeks 14-year-old boys spent 6 weeks with this uncle in South Africa. And one of them, I feel emotional about it because I felt so emotional when she told me. One of them called her on the phone after he had held a liver in his hand of an animal. And I'm not remembering the animal now, but they had hunted it, and he had Uncle Hans had been teaching him what to do, and he held the liver in his hand, and he was crying on the phone with his mother, and he said, "I'll never see life the same way after this moment." Well, and I still know those people. Their kids are now, both those boys are 18 now, actually. And I saw one of those moms about a year ago at a social engagement. She said that whole experience changed their lives. Especially her son was being really belligerent, and a lot of the normal stuff that happens in a divorced family, separation from, trying to psychologically separate from mom, dad's not available, a lot of anger. But that changed their lives. And the other one came home and said, "Mom, I'm going to treat you differently now. I understand you better now. And I haven't respected you, and I haven't respected life." That's a true story.
There is a period of development that's very delayed compared to these other areas that involves this region, the prefrontal cortex, the very front end of the brain. This is an area that humans have a good deal of, far more than other species. In fact, the human brain as a whole is much larger than in other species in general. But this prefrontal cortical area is very critical for some of the behaviors that we know to be essential for hunting. For example, the ability to develop behavioral inhibition, develop restraint, good judgment, the ability to anticipate the long-term consequences of your action, to learn from experience, to acquire lessons from life that shape your judgment in the future. Planning, foresight, all these kinds of capacities depend on the emergence of function in this prefrontal cortex. Now, this is a process that is pretty well known, that mid-teens is a very high-risk time for young males. It's an age associated with risk-taking behaviors. There's an elevated incidence of deaths, injuries. We see this in automobile insurance rates. Young males have to pay very high rates to insure their cars and driving because there's such a high incidence of accidents at this time. This is not, of course, because they're unskilled, that they don't have good motor control, but very often they don't have good judgment. And for a minority of young males, we see the occurrence of violent criminal behavior occurring in about mid-teens and later on into early adulthood. So we have kind of an irony here. This critical period when the frontal lobes begin to develop their functional capacity to control long-term behavior, foresight, planning, impulse control, coincides with a time when rather risky behaviors also occur in young males. Now, this seems to imply that social learning must occur to really provide the final phase of development of this brain system. This is a process that begins very gradually in childhood, where the child learns how to handle a gun, carry it around safely, be out in the field, controlling their behavior all the time, watching out for other people, being very attentive to what they're doing all the time. This is a very serious business and requires a kind of demanding attention to detail on the part of the child. They get better and better at doing this, and eventually they're capable of handling a firearm and actually participating in hunting. But my point here is that this process takes a while. It's not something that happens overnight, and it involves a long training period where the development of restraint, good judgment, self-control are gradually encouraged and formed at a critical period of time when the critical brain support systems become available.
One of my theories is that we don't give kids responsibility in our society, especially a boy by his father, given the responsibility of gun ownership and taught how to shoot and how to master something. It also gives them a feeling of mastery that we don't have in our society. Our society tells us now, you're supposed to have self-esteem and be, feel good about yourself, but they give us all this fluff and they don't really tell us how to really master and how to be good at something. And I think these boys feel like that is something they do with their dad. It's something that they feel they have mastery over, something that kind of sets them apart and makes them feel maybe initiated into the whole male system. I'm sure there are girls who enjoy shooting too, and maybe the same kind of thing for them. I don't think it's such a male-female issue as it is that the kids feel a sense of mastery and a connection to a parent and to a greater society. I know I've read that, I believe it's in Switzerland, where all males are required to own a gun, and there is very little crime in Switzerland. The men, frequently you see them going by with guns on their shoulders. Here in the U.S., if we saw people with, dragging a gun around, we'd probably be petrified. But what we need to do is give them the responsibility to see that, yes, I can act as an adult. Part of acting as an adult is to be responsible. So when you go out and you take a kid hunting and you show a kid how to be responsible, I think you're showing them how to become an adult, which is basically what a teenager is. They're an adult in progress. Our idea of a teenager in American society is that they should have just abstained from everything, and we're not treating them as adults in progress, which is what you're doing when you tell them, yes, I'm going to, trust you with this gun in your hand.
Healthy, sacred hunting creates less violence. And hunting by playing video games creates more violence. And the reason that I say that is, I'll go back to nature here and the way the brain works. My understanding of how the brain works is that the more holistic the experiences, the neural experiences the brain has, the more holistic they are, the more they will lead to future holistic activities of that brain system, of that neural web. So if I sit around playing a bunch of video games, which are based on hunting scenarios and war scenarios, and I play those, but I never see the consequences, I never touch the liver of the antelope, I never touch the dead squirrel, that's not a holistic experience. That's just a hunting war experience that's going on in my fantasy world, and I don't feel the consequences. I don't develop a sense of respect or justice or decency or fairness from that experience. But if I'm hunting and I have a complete that's a holistic neural experience. I not only have to have the skill to acquire the object, to kill the object, I skin it, I take care of it, I feel it against my body, I smell it, I have the blood on my hand. That's a holistic neural experience. That should lead to future holistic neural experiences when I'm faced with life and death again.
And I've tried to explain that hunting really has no similarity to interpersonal aggressive behavior in humans. But many lines of evidence show that hunting by humans and aggressive behavior toward other humans are very different things. The basic question that concerns us here is whether hunting is similar to assaultive behavior. The historical character of human hunting has been inextricably connected with the use of hunted animals for food and other resources like hides. So there's a very specific goal here that's very different from interactions between humans in a kind of hostile, aggressive way. The hunting practices of hunting and foraging people were typically highly codified, with standards of conduct and specific attitudes toward the hunted animals. There were often purification rituals, and the hunters behaved in apologetic, conciliatory ways toward their prey. In fact, a unique characteristic of human hunting practices is the compassionate attitude that human hunters have typically shown toward their prey. A similar standard of conduct characterizes modern hunting practices by lawful, ethical hunters. The attitude toward their prey is respectful. Hunting practices are governed by extensive regulations and ethical standards, with the emphasis on quick, clean kills. Poor impulse control is, in fact, a major cause of a large proportion of aggressive behavior involving young males. I think it should be obvious that the behavioral traits that are cultivated by proper initiation to hunting are greatly different from the behaviors leading to homicides and assaultive behaviors by young males. In fact, hunting, compared to other human activities, is actually a pretty safe activity. The fact is that millions of people in this country hunt every year, going out on the field and hunting for many millions of hours, and the incidence of actual weapons-related injuries is really pretty rare. It's, I think, a good example of the kind of well-cultivated, restrained behavior that is so central to this kind of activity. Another really important illustration, I think, of the kind of mature, restrained behavior that hunting requires is that hunting is usually done in isolated situations. What we're talking about here is the fact that there's no one observing the hunter, typically. There's no one there to immediately enforce the game laws. Yet the hunting population in general tends to abide by the game laws quite well. And I don't know that we could say the same thing about the population in general, where if people aren't observed carefully, they may tend to violate traffic laws, cheat on their income taxes, things like that, if there's no one watching. When in fact hunters do abide by the laws all the time, even though they know pretty well there's no one there to observe them.
That access to weapons is not one of the major reasons that kids are going over the edge. And in fact, there have been studies that have shown recently that boys who own firearms, who legally own firearms given to them by their fathers, have less behavior problems than kids who don't own guns at all, or boys, of course, who illegally own guns, who tend to be gang members or troublemakers. But those boys who are kind of indoctrinated and go hunting with their fathers, those are the boys who actually seem to do the best and have the best behavior and have the least problem with the juvenile detention facilities. So you look at the kids like the Columbine boys, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. They were kids who they felt they had very little in terms of acceptance in their school. Their parents really didn't set any boundaries with them at all. In fact, there was in their videotapes, I believe one of them was saying that his mother would come through his room. She would even see like shotguns hanging out of his bag. And I think he was really trying to tell her something. And she obviously wasn't listening. But what it was is there was this symbol, and I think the gun represents the symbol that, hey, I'm going to be powerful whether you want me to be or not. And unfortunately, they use that symbol in a very negative instead of a positive way, which, maybe through, if they'd had parents or teachers or someone who had been involved with them, maybe showing them proper ways to handle guns. I don't know, maybe that camaraderie and that initiation would have been enough for them not to have wanted to prove their manhood by going to the school and shooting up, 15, 16 people and killing themselves.
And the same thing was true in the Irish tradition. In times of peace, the Red Branch Knights, they were the bards, the singers, the storytellers. They were the ones that mentored the children and taught the ways of the forest. And in times of war, you didn't want to be on the wrong side of them. And I think that's the spirit that's missing. I don't think our youth have that. I don't think our culture has it anymore. The honorable warrior, I love the story that I hear from Tony Tenfingers, from his lineage, from Crazy Horse, he was from the Crazy Horse band. He talked about Crazy Horse, that man would not bring warriors into his war party that couldn't cry. And men who were cold and had grown cold and sharp in their thinking, or with hate or prejudiced, he wouldn't ride with them. He wouldn't let them be in his war parties. He only took men who cried from the sensitiveness that they felt because they knew the value of life and they saw the sacredness in all things. So I think that's where it would be. Our warriors would be like that. And I think that's what the warriors need to be. To me, I call it now a domestic national security measure. Can we awaken our sleeping public? Can we awaken them out of the dream that they exist in, which exists in some commercial, and bring them back to the sacredness of what it is to be alive?
Initiation to modern hunting can serve several critical functions. It involves formalized, systematic training in controlled behavior, guided by social codes of conduct. It provides adult models to emulate, people who show by example the proper standards of behavior. It's becoming increasingly apparent that male role models are without substitute. They have to be available for proper development of children. The initiation process in hunting also places responsibility on the adult model to behave in the appropriate manner. This, of course, is a critical thing that has its own benefits. I think if initiation to hunting were conducted at the right level, formally, thoroughly, with certain standards of attainment, there should be formal recognition or certification of such attainment. This would be something very different from other aspects of life, like sports and school. It should promote a sense of self-worth, a kind of distinction. And here we can go back to the data on homicide from Daly and Wilson. What they discovered was that some of the most impulsive, violent behaviors perpetrated by young males were typically done by males who apparently regarded themselves as losers without distinction in the society. And this violent behavior was kind of a last-ditch effort to attain some kind of recognition and acknowledgement of status. This initiation process provides an authentic, realistic type of education about nature also, and our place in it. It places us in the tradition of the great hunter conservationists like Theodore Roosevelt and Aldo Leopold. Being a hunter and being properly initiated into hunting as a young male allows one to see the world as a participant, the natural world, and to understand our proper place there. You're no longer just a spectator or an outsider.
It would be a more peaceful country. It would be a country in which men were less concerned with hunting, in terms of getting themselves to the top of the corporate ladder and competing for those things, because they would have experienced what it really means to hunt, what it really means to reach the object, acquire the object, be part of the drama of life. And so they wouldn't have to step on everyone to create the drama. So therefore, I just think it would be a more peaceful country. I think it would be a somewhat less competitive country. I don't think people would be as competitive. There would be a lot more empathy and compassion, I think, in the culture. I suspect that, this is just a suspicion, I suspect that there'd be a little more peace between the sexes, because it would be a little clearer to men who they are and who they should be. And by should be, I don't mean I know what they should be. I mean that they would internally sense what they should be to fully be men. And therefore life would be easier for women, because women would know who a man was, and the man would know how to express who he was. And initiation makes a healthier man, a man who's better at saying, this is who I am, and this is how I will be of service. I also suspect that it wouldn't have taken us until now to have service education in high schools, or in middle schools. I mean, I think service education would just be a part of life. The sense of giveaway, which is the Native American word for service, or our word service, that would just be much more a part of life, which would bring more peace. So I think it would be a more peaceful country, and I think people would know who, especially men, would know who they are better. And and women too, maybe. I mean, we're talking about boys because that's our subject, but I think a lot of girls and women enjoy hunting, so they would have a sense. We'd be closer to nature, and we'd definitely take better care of the environment.
There is a principle that my uncle Gilbert Walkingbowl taught me, Wo Chantu Ognaka. He said, those who we carry in our hearts. He said every human was born with a network that we were connected to, that we are meant to caretake. That network includes our blood family by default. And it includes the ones we love deeply with our hearts, our spiritual friends, our lovers that we end up marrying and have family with. And it includes mysterious connections with the natural world. And each of us is drawn to something, and something is drawn to each of us in nature. And when we are living in a modern world, we pattern our brain on so many things that insulate us from those feelings, those connections, and we drop our network. We forget about it. We don't only forget the natural world, we forget the other people around us, but maybe we also forget ourselves. And I'm not even going to say maybe, we do. We lose our own love of ourselves, too. And in the sacred way, not in the vain way. And when we take young people out into the forest and we work with them on a continuous basis, the caretaker network, Wo Chantu Ognaka, that principle, that attribute, awakens again inside them, naturally. And they awaken and they become staunch defenders and protectors of everything in their caretaker network. And they might take the cause of the wolves, or they might take the cause of that forest, or they might take the cause of hunting or fishing, but they will take the cause of something all by themselves. But by having a continuous, ongoing, mentoring relationship between people and nature, that they automatically claim their sacred responsibility to caretake this place that we share. It happens automatically. There is no way to impose that on anyone. No laws, no ideologies, there is nothing that can cause a person to take up that lance of stewardship except connection. And there's no way to get them connection except through mentoring. Whether it be hunting, fishing, wandering, whatever it is. I think that hunting has its place, it has its role in our community, and that there's a big gap between what modern Westerners are able to comprehend the value of and where hunting begins. And so I think that the kinds of mentoring that I'm currently involved in really help the hunting movement and really bring people to a sense of sacred harvest. Heck, it brings them into gardening. It brings them into every aspect of interacting with the land there is. I mean, they take up all kinds of different lifestyles after the journey through the mentoring of tracking. Whether they're women, men, young or old, it strikes that place. They're liable to pick up the hunt at that point and follow it all the way. And not only that, but turn right around and make sure that they mentor it backwards too. That's very, very important as well. So I think, the short answer to that question is hunting and nature education, nature mentoring are absolutely interdependent, and that the modern world today requires a kind of a measure of communication that's never been necessary before in history because of the collective impact of our current lifestyle, which has also never existed before.
If you look back into hunting in North America in mid-century, the hunters were the heroes. They were the people that were stopping the destruction of the environment. They were the people that were restoring the habitats for wildlife. They were the people that initiated every major piece of conservation legislation in the early part of this century, clear up through the 1960s at least, and into the early 1970s. And here, of course, we have a tremendous history. Groups like Ducks Unlimited are now over 60 years old, and in the late 1990s, if you are under 40 years of age, you saw more waterfowl in the North American flyway than at any time in your life. These are enormous accomplishments. We have to teach them to ourselves and teach them to the rest of our society and teach them to our young people. And once they know of the responsible activities engaged in by the hunting community, the notion of being a part of that community will strengthen and grow, and I think more people will be attracted to it.
I think the foundation of peak experiences or of spiritual experiences, the foundation of those is in nature, and we can recreate them in a church beautifully, in a synagogue, in a mosque. They can be recreated. But I think if we track every spiritual ritual back, we're going to track it back to something that was natural initially, and then it got moved. And so nature, I think, is the pure peak experience, and then being involved in the life-death drama in nature, the same life-death drama that I'm involved in if I go to a Christian church or a Catholic church and I'm involved in Jesus' life and death. Well, that's very important, obviously, to me as a Christian, let's say. And I'm getting that naturally in hunting. I'm getting the life-death experience naturally in hunting. So my sense is that the basis for these peak experiences and for the religious experiences people have involves the fact that it's nature-based and that we're in our own nature.
We humans are at the top of the food chain. If it's to become a love chain, then we have to participate directly in it. For the same reason that it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, it's better to have hunted an animal and eaten it than never to have hunted. The same principle applies to eating a plant that we grow. Only by participating in the most fundamental processes of life may we develop a profound respect for nature and the responsibility to fiercely protect it. The earth is crying out for more young to fall in love with her. TV nature programs and abstract ideologies will not win the hearts of men nor bring them to steward creation. Philosophies and scientific theories of interdependence must be experientially based so that a human feels emotionally bonded to the earth and creatures. That is why the taking of a life that feeds us is transformative for our world and us. That also is why the hunter puts his money where his heart is.
Na heart, using my heart. I speak from the heart, speak from the heart. I'm using my heart, I'm using my heart.